Welcome back to Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg, and joining me, of course, is my co-host, Jessica Lewis, who was not right in her prediction this week.
I know, but you were right in your
Yes, I
predictions.
was.
Isn't that
Oh,
crazy?
I'm glad you
Oh
mentioned that.
gosh.
I, of course, would never have brought that up
Oh,
on
of
my
course, you
own.
never would have.
No,
No, you are
no.
so humble
Yes,
and you
I
don't
am the
like to
most
ever
humble.
remind people that you were
No,
right about things. It's
no,
not like you have a
never,
sign hanging
never,
up.
never.
Not like I created a sweatshirt just for
Yes,
that purpose.
yes, yes.
Yeah. I
Uh,
considered wearing it, but I was like, no, he's going to talk about it enough. We don't need a
I
constant
didn't bring it
reminder.
up. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, what? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
understand.
So crazy how things like that
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. Um, but even on those occasions when I am right, we still need to go through the rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season one and have been updating ever since, so we could see how Sami did with those rules while looking at all the non-spoiler information available,
Mm-hmm.
including interviews, social media, and secret scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
now, I do want to mention that although we didn't have Noel's interviews in time for our podcast last week, which was, I guess, technically this week, um,
Mm-hmm.
due to Thanksgiving timing, again, the confusing world of time. Um,
It's like the butterfly effect.
yes, there wasn't anything in them that changed what we said, which is always a good thing.
Yes.
In fact, the way she discussed how she trusted Jesse, even though he kept stabbing her in the back, it
Mm-hmm.
it emphasized a point we made several times in that podcast.
Yeah. Jesse's just amazing.
All
Well, I
right.
think
Well,
that's
there's the preview.
highlighted.
There's the preview of the Why Jesse Won podcast, everyone.
Well,
So,
it's highlighted very much by Sami. It's this. Jesse just
yep.
seems to have a interesting. I don't. It's just like an incredible effect on people, I guess, where he just lulls them in. It's like this
Yeah.
sense of comfort, and then cuts them. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll discuss that, I'm sure. But before we get to the rules, we always have some other things to talk about besides the stuff that we already talked about.
Mm.
And this week we'll start with Sami telling Carla that Cassidy was coming after her last week.
Oh yes, that was a fun little moment.
Yeah. Now, despite the fact that it didn't really make sense since Cassidy didn't even vote for Carla,
Mm.
Carla seemed to believe him. And,
Yeah.
and this led to a flashback from who knows when, uh,
Mm-hmm.
showing Carla telling Cassidy about having the idol. Or, I mean, really, the way it was admitting to it. Since
Yeah.
Cassidy was basically suggesting it like, well, if you happen to have the idol because you were
Right.
collecting those beads, hint, hint. Um, and Carla, admitted to it. And now worried that Cassidy would tell someone and turn her game upside down. But newsflash, Carla, everybody already knows.
And that's a fair point, but I think for Carla out there, she's probably convinced herself that people really don't know.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
and so this is the point in the game where paranoia is going to be going through the roof, and any little nugget of information that you can give to someone to make their brain spin just a little bit more is going to actually cause that to happen. It's a very, very difficult thing to stop from happening, and then to have information like that told to you when you already have this backstory, you have this secret that you don't want
right.
anyone to know, and then all of a sudden it's being teased that, well, she was dropping your name, and then you start trying to justify in your own head, well, why would she do that? Oh, well, she knows I have an idol, and of course she's going to do that. And so you end up creating a narration that doesn't actually exist just because of a little bit of information that's fed to you.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I just want to warn podcast listeners and viewers: if you hear me sniffle, I will try not to into the microphone to do my
So
best. Or
kind.
yes, if you see me disappeared, I am not disappeared.
Disappeared.
It makes it sound like I've been taken away. If you see me disappear, I am fighting a lovely head cold right now and
Oh
losing.
my goodness.
But yeah, why David lost the battle with his head cold.
Oh
Um,
no. So sad.
um, but anyway, continuing with the Sammy and Carla saga,
Mm-hmm.
even Carla ended up in this tribal council voting against Sammy, and we really didn't get an answer as to why in the show. Um, Sammy said in his interviews that he later found out Carla decided to change it to him when he revealed that he was playing the shot in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's not entirely clear why. Did
Well,
she?
I
Go
have a
ahead.
theory.
Okay.
Obviously, he's losing his vote, right?
Yes.
And so the numbers are probably very close. And so the idea of voting out Cassidy probably really required all those who sounded as if they were going to be vote for Cassidy actually vote for Cassidy. And I think Carla probably just sat there and went, "Well, wait a second. If he doesn't have his vote, we're definitely not going to be able to get her out. So why should I drop her name and then have her be frustrated with me because I voted for her and she's definitely not going home."
Yeah, that was one of my possibilities that I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking of, but that requires some sort of vote split. And there was no indication that there was discussion of a vote split. Everybody that we saw told Carla, "Oh yeah, Cassidy, we're voting Cassidy." Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it would have to be that
Yeah.
she knew there was some sort of vote split that required Sammy's vote.
Well, it also could have just been Carla kind of reading the room and that
Yeah.
moment because if Sammy decides that he's going to be playing a shot in the dark, there has to be a reason why he's feeling that way.
Yes.
And so if she's thinking, well, he thinks he's getting votes, well, then clearly something's happening that I don't know about. And if we're all on the Cassidy train and we're all supposed to be voting her out, why is Sammy acting this way? Because they do have a very close relationship.
Right.
And we've learned more about that in his exit press. So I think she probably saw that moment and actually read a tribal council correctly and said, you know what I thought's happening is not happening. I feel like she's so good at reading people in this game that that's likely where her head went.
Yeah, it's like you're reading my notes. That was
Mm,
my other option too, was, that she may have realized, oh, he thinks he's in trouble. He must be in trouble. I'm the one left out of the loop, so I better get back in the loop.
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I suppose we maybe we'll find out next week in a flashback. They'll get back to camp and they'll be like, "Oh, it was a unanimous vote." And we'll get a flashback with Carla confessional saying, "Oh yeah, I changed my vote because of this."
Right. It'll be so helpful because it will be a week later.
Yeah. These producers, they just don't care anything about us week to week podcasters.
Right? They make it very difficult for us. My goodness. Work with us, people.
Come on. Yeah.
It's insane.
Now, another thing that happened in Tribal Council was Jesse once again emphasizing that trust is currency. And if you spend too much time examining it,
Mm,
then you get back to camp and people will worry about you. Now, this was awfully convenient for him to say,
mm-hmm.
specifically towards Sammy, since Sammy really obviously should have been questioning the trust of others and
Right.
wasn't getting back to camp. Um, but also more generally, since Jesse is usually the one getting people to trust him,
Yeah.
as we discussed last week, and as you mentioned already, that he's the one saying, "Trust me, trust me." So of course he doesn't want people questioning that trust. Here,
Right.
take this $100 bill. No! Don't run that little marker thing over. It's good. It's good. Don't hold it up to the light. Don't worry that it has a picture of me on it instead of who's supposed to be on it. It's good. Trust me.
Well, if everyone who is working with Jesse truly feels like he's with them, hearing him say those words just emphasizes that for them again, right?
Right.
Where they hear him saying trust is currency and it checks all the boxes that they need to hear, not realizing that he's doing it to everyone who's sitting there, because everyone is probably having that same response to it, that, oh, of course, we have to show that we trust each other so that way we can continue to play the game together. And Jesse's got my back. And so I hear what he's saying. It comes across as very genuine, especially when you are maneuvering everyone as well as you are throughout this game.
Yes, yes. Now, I did tweet this thought out at the time, or maybe it was in my second watch, and Jesse liked it. So make of that what you will.
Interesting.
So finally, I want to discuss what happened at the immunity challenge. As it dragged on while we were watching, at one point during live tweeting, I asked, what happens if they last through high tide and the water starts to recede? I would not have guessed 2 people win immunity was the answer to this question.
Yeah.
But there we were. I understand production not wanting to just let it go on forever, because unlike in David versus Goliath, they couldn't postpone tribal council to the next day because they shortened the season.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, and what are you going to do? Wait for the next high tide to come in?
Or who freezes first?
Well, yeah. So I'm just not thrilled by them giving 2 people immunity with a third tacked on for Cody's advantage.
Well, and that's you know what? We need to spend some time talking about that too. Can we talk about that now, or am I jumping ahead?
I don't know. I don't think you're jumping ahead. What are you jumping
ahead
to?
I just need to make sure. Well, I'm talking about that the advantage that Cody had, because it really was much more than like, I mean, I went out into the Twitterverse and was like, how is this supposed to work? And people were like, well, it's just like an idol. But it's not just like an idol, because he is automatically not going to get voted for, because people are going to assume that he is also safe, even though he might have been completely wrong and not safe. So I feel like it was problematic, the structure that came with that, because there was this assumption, well, we can't vote for Cody. How about you just find out, right after the immunity challenge?
Yeah, I think it would have been much better to find out. I can't remember which podcast I was listening to, if it was Know It Alls or the one with Adam, and they were saying, oh yeah, I like this because it enables some gameplay. No,
it cuts off a whole nother person.
Right, because you can't risk, especially when there were 2 winners.
Right.
So now he had an even greater chance.
Yeah, so Cody was 100% safe regardless of who he picked.
Sami even said that. Sami said there was no way people were voting for Cody in his interviews.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was effectively an idol since it wasn't revealed. You reveal it.
It was effectively immunity.
Yeah.
Just straight up immunity.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had 3 out of 7 people immune.
Yes.
And I don't think it affected the outcome. I think Sami was gone no matter what. I mean, unless he had won immunity, but he was already out by then. But I still think they should have done something like hold your breath. Okay. Go under. Hold your breath.
And don't die.
Yeah. And the first one to, or the last one under, wins immunity. I don't think it would have been that complicated.
Well, and I do think that this late in the game, when you only have 7 people left, immunity becomes that much more significant, and you really are affecting the gameplay so much more by providing 2 people immunity when that wasn't in the cards. And I understand that Survivor likes to switch things up. I get it, but I feel like this switch up was a little extreme considering how far along we are in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jeff had an interview with Dalton Ross, where he was saying, "Oh, as this happened, and I saw it happening, I was, making little signals to production and the rest of production. They agreed." And I'm like, again, a hold your breath challenge. Okay, push yourself under. Whoever stays there the longest wins immunity. It is not that difficult.
Yeah. I do want to spend just 2 more minutes on this if we could, because I was looking
at hold on, I'm starting the timer.
You're starting the timer. Like the positioning of how people were keeping themselves under that grate. I feel like Carla had a little bit of an extra added bonus because she was on the end and she was using that leg to like wrap her leg around.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I
Yeah.
mostly noticed Cassidy putting her
Cassidy was
legs
great. Yeah, like she
through.
had her legs through. But
Yeah,
I just thought it was interesting because Carla was, because of where she was, she could utilize that spot. Whereas you had, if you were in the middle, you were just kind of floating unless you wrapped your legs around the top. And who knows? I mean,
and
she
it's
still,
random. I mean, it's a
right.
random draw.
Right, and she obviously did an incredible job. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to downplay what she did, but I always have a tendency to look at those things and wonder, like, does that help? Is that helpful in that current
right.
situation and what's happening, especially if the tide is coming in and the swell, and if you're
Yeah.
able to like lock on a little bit more. I don't know, I'm curious.
Yeah, I think with the way the swells came in, differently from the way it was in more calm water in previous times,
Mm,
I think this turned really into, and this is why I thought the tiebreaker should be a breath holding challenge, is because it turned into a breath holding challenge.
right. Oh, it did for
You
sure.
know, because I thought Cassidy had it locked up because she has
Mm-hmm.
a thinner face and could
Yep.
get herself more out of the water. But it doesn't matter if the swells are coming over you and staying
Yeah.
over you. You can get your face through the grate.
Right.
It's not going to matter because the
It's
water's
just
all
water.
over you there. Yeah.
I would have drowned in 2 seconds, so I really can't say much about anything. I almost drowned in sand when I was in one of my challenges, so I would have been it would have been so bad. Don't bet on Jessica in that challenge because I would have definitely drowned. I would have been dying. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
terrible.
So
So, impressive all around, but just interesting with the positioning of people and where they
yeah.
were. I'm
Yeah.
curious. Maybe Carla can answer that question.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything else you want to discuss before we move on?
Well, I do think that I know we're going to talk a lot about Sami, but I feel like the episode was so dramatically different than what we have been seeing of Sami that it was like I didn't know where he was coming from because I think it was like it
Neither
was
did
like
he.
this. It was like it wasn't me. I didn't do it. Okay, I lied. Okay, and then
Yeah.
he like cries about his mother, and then he was like, you know what? I'm just gonna lie again. And it was it was like we finally saw the real Sami. I feel like the real Sami came out for just the beginning portion of the
Yeah.
episode,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I think overall you hit all the highlights, and I think we will have a lot of good things to discuss regarding Sami, even though he found himself voted out.
Yes. Well, before we see how he did, the there it is. The
It's
we need to
coming.
mention that the rules we're about to discuss come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster
Ta-da.
form.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. Scroll down to this poster here and click on it.
That's right.
And then order it. Should add that part in there. And then our shipping department will get it out to you as quickly as possible. I don't know. Shipping department. Let me put in a call to the shipping department. Shipping department there's still time for Christmas deliveries, right?
There is definitely still time for Christmas delivery. So order now so we can get
Yeah.
that to you before it gets too close to Christmas and then you're worried about getting presents under the
Yes.
tree or even Hanukkah, right? We can
Yes.
this is all types of holidays here can be celebrated
That's
with
right.
this poster. So get on it,
Absolutely.
order it.
You should
December
get
is here. Let's
8
do it.
posters for Hanukkah, one for each
Right.
night.
Oh, this is a perfect plan.
Yes. And also for anyone outside the US, this came up recently on Twitter. DM Jessica.
Yes, because I am confirming shipping costs for various locations and we can definitely get that sorted out. So
All right.
please do that.
All right. In addition to the poster, you can scroll down a little more and get the poster on a T-shirt, or
T-shirt.
get the checklist on a T-shirt.
Perfect.
We do not control this shipping department, so you should get in there and order it as soon as possible. If you want to do this as a gift or a gift for yourself,
Right.
just to make sure that it gets there in time. So
Yes,
again, that's
absolutely.
robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
Fabulous.
All right.
Oh, geez.
Yeah,
There's
well,
a
I
lot happening.
got to take a deep breath in order
Gotta
to
get ready.
get ready because I got to say it all in one breath, or else I'll probably start coughing or something.
Poor Bloomberg.
Yeah. Sammy said at the beginning of the episode that he dug himself a hole and it was hard to see how he'd get out of it. And, well, he didn't. It seemed like he'd been doing well up to that point. So, what changed? How did he find himself in that hole? How long had he been digging without even realizing it? And why couldn't he find a ladder when he needed it? It's
Oh,
time to figure out why Sammy lost.
that was incredible.
The first and most important rule tells players they need to scheme and plot. And it's pretty clear that Sammy knew all about this one.
Mm-hmm.
From the beginning, while Ellie and Janine wondered if the Baca guys were even talking game, he was revving up Gabler and Owen to stick together and tell each other if either of the women tried to talk to them. At the same time, he kept up appearances with the women while telling us that Ellie thought she was running the tribe, but he'd show her. Technically, Gabler showed her, but he helped egg it on by keeping Gabler in the loop when otherwise he would have been rather out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that was something he tried to do all game long. Talk to just about everybody and make it seem like he was always on their side.
Yeah, and I will say I was very impressed with his ability to pull this off as well as he did, just considering the fact that he was obviously to us flipping back and forth and flipping a significant amount over and over again, but it didn't really seem to negatively affect him because for some reason he was able to justify it with everyone that he was still playing the game with. So it was like a skill that is, I think, a difficult type of skill to have in a game like this, because trust, as we've heard, is currency, right? And and for a while it didn't seem like people were paying attention, but then all of a sudden it started to come out like, well, Sammy flips all the time. And it's like the acknowledgement that we all have been sitting on our couches going, what is happening here? Why are they allowing this to happen? And it's almost like they knew that it was happening, but they were allowing it to happen in a weird way. I almost feel like there was some sense of Sammy still brings us something, like that he's an added component to our game, regardless of the fact that he's flipping. And he managed to really do it quite well until it didn't work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we can look back and see some of why it was working. Ellie described in her interview with Mike Bloom saying he's very convincing. I really felt like even after knowing that he had betrayed my trust that one time, I could still trust him.
Yeah.
Now that was specifically, the merge situation when Gabler revealed that Sammy had told him about the bag search, and Sammy came up on the spot with the story about how Gabler had supposedly backed him into the corner and she bought it. But she further said, I'd walk up and I would hear him being like, y'all, she's such a good person. She did not do that. And apparently I know now, because we're friends and we talk, that I would walk away and he'd be like, bro, we got to get her out. She's bad. And he kept doing that sort of double dealing through his time in the game. Janine told Dalton Ross, Sam Bam, I just love that. Sam Bam is such a great player in the sense that he really had us fooled. And James, fast forwarding a bit, said in interviews that they had no idea Sammy was working the other side or how hard Sammy was playing. Plus, just us seeing him turn on people and then like immediately running back to them to make amends
Right.
after voting against them.
And that was the thing that he was so good at, because I do feel like, and maybe his youth certainly aided him in this regard, where he was going back and was able to convince people that he had to do whatever it was he did, because the one example you provided, he was backed into a corner and he had to say something. Because there is, I feel like in this game, there's not a whole lot of checking back on information that's being provided, because you don't want to necessarily feel like now I'm throwing someone else under the bus, or they're going to know that I'm talking to that person. So it's self-preservation as well.
Right.
So I want this information from Sammy. Sammy tells me, well, Gabler backed me into a corner and I had to tell him. And Ellie, knowing the relationship she had with Gabler, isn't going to go back to Gabler to try to confirm that information, because that doesn't help you either. And so it's a great way to play if you can pull it off, but you have to be convincing and you have to be able to think on your feet, which Sammy was clearly very good at doing.
Yes. Yes.
so he could have those quick responses and have something that would make sense in this person's mind, considering all of the pieces that were happening relative to the game, but it still fit weirdly, even though it was not true.
Right, right. But, you know, as he was doing all this maneuvering, he forgot about someone. And he said in interviews that he stopped paying attention to Gabler
Mm-hmm.
in terms of he wasn't giving him the full check in and discussion that this rule talks about. Instead, he said he was just kind of popping up, telling him what to do, and moving on.
Mm-hmm.
But as Sami told Mike Bloom, Gabler was somebody that you've got to keep in the loop.
Yeah.
He wants to know what's going on. He doesn't want to be left out of things. And so once he stopped putting in that FaceTime with Gabler, others were able to kind of come in and grab him.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point about Gabler, because Gabler's playing a much different game than Sami is. His game is very
Yeah.
apparent and people see it, and he's very emotional. And so I feel all of those things are kind of more in your face. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can, not that he's predictable, but he just is but compared to what Sami is doing,
Right.
so Gabler is someone you have to check in with because he is unpredictable and he's emotional. And Gabler stopped taking advantage of the way that Gabler was playing the game, and then
Yeah.
other people started to.
Right.
So I thought that was a very interesting point for him to make, because that is a very personal component of Gabler, and I feel like he was almost like somewhat offended that suddenly he wasn't as significant to Sami anymore. And that can work. It could definitely work against you in a game like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this was to close out this rule. I want to make a point that you had alluded to earlier, that just as Sami was fooling the others, as we mentioned, he was also getting fooled. He
Mm-hmm.
told Dalton Ross, I was also blinded by Jesse and Cody. Now, he knew he didn't want to sit next to them in the end, as he wanted to be with his original Baka guys, allies. Say that 3 times fast, or don't. Um, but he didn't realize that Jesse had basically become a cult leader. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, he was another in the line of people who got outplayed by Jesse.
Yes. And I think it's interesting that we have so many people in this final group that are playing an eerily similar game, because it's under the radar, but it's still rather awesome because
Mm-hmm.
it's just a much different, nuanced type of gameplay where they are forming those relationships with everything or with everyone, and everything seems like very kumbaya, and they all are getting along and everything's great, but it's all like under the surface, which
Mm-hmm.
is very impressive because we normally don't see so many people trying to attempt that same feat. And I feel like we have at least a few that
Right.
are doing that and are doing it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
Final
we can.
tribal council will be interesting.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. In 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. Wow. One and a half weeks, technically, I guess.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
soon.
Just kind of hit me. Whew. Um, anyway, we can move to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Sami himself said in this week's episode that he'd been playing the middle all game, and if you play with fire, you're going to get burned.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Play with fire. And he was right. Among the all the back and forth between groups that we just discussed in the first rule, Sami wanted to make sure he stood out. A couple weeks ago, he said that he felt like he was on the bottom of that alliance of 7, but he wanted to be in control and make decisions for the rest of the game. So he took steps to do that, but it meant flipping. And then he said he wouldn't flip, and he flipped again. And as you brought up already, other people have been noticing this. Last week, Carla said Sami was all over the place. Noelle said she couldn't trust him. Jesse said Sami wasn't seen as trustworthy by any side. It was not a good spot to be in terms of this rule.
No, and I really do feel like it kind of snowballed for him, because it's almost like you get momentum and you think that something is working, and it was working for him, But then it's like you continue to be a little more risky and a little more emboldened. And he even indicated in one of, I think it was the reward challenge that Noel brought him on, where all of a sudden he was just kind of announcing to everyone what he wanted for the next vote. And it wasn't even like a discussion. It was like, this is what I'm doing and this is, what's going to happen. And that was it. And there wasn't a discussion. It was just him being very confident in his decision. And I feel like he got there because it had been working for him so well. But it was like with every time it worked, he
Mm-hmm.
pushed it a little bit more and became a little more confident and a little more extra. And it finally just got to a point where I think this episode, he wasn't sure how to come back from that, because it was like all of a sudden he realized things were starting to spiral. And instead of trying to improve his situation, he just made it worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So even though he was really good at the strategic component of it, he overdid it and pushed so hard that then it became very problematic for him.
Yeah, and in retrospect, Sammy does recognize where he went wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
He told Mike Bloom that he seemed to think everybody else was blind. He said, "I thought they couldn't see that I was going this way and that way, and then this way and back that way, and that was on me. That was a total misstep on my part." But he also said he wouldn't have wanted to play any other way because he had relationships with everyone, and
Mm-hmm.
he thinks it's better to get to the end without anyone saying he didn't talk to them.
Right.
So instead, he wanted to give them each a little hope that he was working with them. The problem was giving that hope and taking it away, much
Yes.
like the comparison that was made to Lucy pulling away the football from Charlie Brown Owen. Um, people don't really appreciate that.
Right.
Uh, so there needs to be a middle ground. And I think if he had seen that at the time, he would have been right in further saying in that interview that he could talk his way out of it. But he wasn't able to do that in part because he underestimated his competition.
Yes, that is a very fair point. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the third rule tells players to be flexible. Given what we just discussed, how do you think Sammy did here?
I would say incredibly flexible when
Yes.
we're talking about flip flopping as much as we've been doing. And it again, this is something that we've already discussed, but that's a very difficult place to put yourself going back and forth. But certainly he did not care who he was going to be playing with or voting with, as long as he kind of kept his end game goals in mind. Although he had his particulars that he wanted to see sit with him at the end, I think the mere fact that he was willing to consider all of the options clearly speaks to his flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. With everything we already discussed, it's pretty clear he was flexible. He looked at every possible opportunity. When he
Mm-hmm.
could move, he moved. When he couldn't, he didn't, even if he wanted to. And if he needed to completely make up a new lie, he
He
completely
did.
make up a new lie, whatever it took.
His mom would be proud.
Yeah.
Is that what he said?
Maybe not about the lying part, but yes. Uh,
No, no.
yeah.
Oh, that's what I should have mentioned. He's going to be like the next spokesperson for like Tesla or something, right?
Yeah. I don't know about that anymore. But
It's questionable.
yeah. I mean, considering his interview where he, was like, yeah, I just wanted to be able to drive me, and I don't want to pay attention, and I bought this device to fool the system into thinking I was doing it. I don't know that that's a great thing for a spokesman.
No, probably not. Like you
So
can just drive your car without paying any attention.
yeah,
It's not good.
no. All right. Well, the fourth rule tells players not to let their emotions control them. What do you think about Sammy in this rule?
Oh, he did a phenomenal job. I think at the beginning.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the episode where we really got to see Sammy reacting emotionally to something that was happening. I think in the previous situations where he found himself in a difficult spot, he was able to pull himself out of it by continuing to think game, even though he was going to have to potentially lie or turn his back on someone. But I feel like once he was left out of something, it had such an effect on him emotionally, because all of a sudden he was realizing I was completely left out of that one. And that stung and that hurt. And now I don't know how to react and what to say. And I think his emotions took over, which is why the lie to Carla was so terrible. And then when he tried to like fix it, it was even worse. And so it was like, I feel like that was a very emotional response to the situation he was in. And it wasn't the Sami that we are used to seeing or were used to seeing.
Yeah, I didn't really see that as emotion. I can see what you're saying. I think he just, at the beginning of the episode, he tried to lie, realized they were fact checking him with Gabler, and they were going to believe Gabler. They weren't going to believe him. So he was just like, all right, yeah, you got me. And then, you know, for him to lie like that, flat out lie to Carla, who he called Auntie in his interviews, I thought he was doing a good job of putting his emotions aside to try to stay in the game. I mean, it didn't work, but you know, I thought he was just trapped. He
Yeah, and I don't disagree. Like I do feel like he was trapped, but I feel like the Sami that we've seen trapped previously just reacted differently. There was a different type of response. And there was a confessional that he did where he talked about not being included in that vote, and essentially that was a realization for him that the hole you were talking about digging,
yeah.
he dug a pretty big hole and he was going to have to try to figure out what to do. And I do feel like he did lose some of his ability to keep things in check at that moment, because I think a lot of things were happening. That's right after tribal council. It's right after you find out you were left out and nobody included you in the vote, and now you're being called out because you voted out or you tried to vote out Carla. So there's a lot of things that are happening in that moment. To me, watching him respond to that, it didn't feel like the same Sami that I've been seeing on screen.
Yeah, I agree it wasn't the same. I don't know. I didn't personally chalk it up to emotions. I chalked it up to I'm trapped on all sides. I don't, I'm going to go down swinging, but I know that I'm not surviving this here. He's
Right.
the last man on the battlefield and the hordes are coming for him. So, all right. Well, the fifth rule tells players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. I mentioned in the second rule how Sami felt like he had made relationships with everyone, and it certainly seemed like this was true. Nobody had anything bad to say about him or his social game in that regard, and I think that was part of the reason he lasted as long as he did. He was just, oh, here's this nice kid, and people just didn't necessarily see, kind of like what you said, they didn't see all of what he was doing until it
Right.
just became so obvious that they
Right.
couldn't miss it anymore.
And I think one of his goals, he actually talked about this in his pre-game interviews, and that was this idea of utilizing his youth to his advantage, because he understood he's not bringing much life experience, I should say, to the game. And so what he wanted to do was talk to people about those people, let them talk about themselves, learn as much as he could about them. And that was the plan that he had going into this game, was that it wasn't going to be so much about him. It was going to be about him talking to other people, which he's clearly very good at. But I think that certainly worked so well for him, because if you're talking to someone and they feel like you're really listening to them, they're going to appreciate that. And he clearly did that with everyone, but it was certainly part of his plan going into the game, just recognizing where he was in life versus where some of these other people were in life, and just taking advantage of the fact that they have a lot of wisdom to provide. And he was going to try to utilize that to just be this sponge and tell me about yourself and what do you do and how do you do it. And I think that certainly helped form a bond and create relationships with the people that he was playing with, because they felt liked, they felt
right,
cared about, they felt interested in, and all of those things will help certainly keep you in the game longer.
yeah. I mean, you can see it in the fact that even after he voted for Carla, Carla was still willing to talk to him,
Right.
still willing, and so yeah, I think you can definitely see it there. All right. Well, the sixth rule warns against being too much of a threat, and we heard a lot about that in this episode. Maybe not as much as in the previous episode with Noelle, but still a lot. The thing is, I think some of what we heard were overblown. Uh, Now, the part about him flipping back and forth, that was obviously real. If nobody can count on you, that makes you a threat.
Right.
And indeed, that was one main reason I predicted he'd be voted out this week. And then,
oh, look at you. I see you sprinkling that in.
I mean, it's true. Then when Carla started pushing to keep Sami, Jesse got suspicious of this apparently. Oh, where's this new and strong relationship coming from here? And that's a threat.
Right. Well, and that's something that we've talked about too, where those relationships become threatening to individual people. And then that gives them a little bit of a fire and a reason to be like, well, I need to push for this person to go. And if Jesse is thinking that he and Carla are close and all of a sudden he's thinking Carla's closer to Sami, certainly that's going to become an issue to him. He's all about working the numbers and wants to know that he's controlling those numbers.
Yeah.
So I think that relationship was certainly a concern. 100%.
Yeah. Now, the part that I think was overblown was his fire making, which is the actual reason I'm wearing the shirt.
Look at you.
Maybe people didn't remember this or they didn't know because they were on a different tribe, but he was the one who first started fire at Baka.
Yeah.
And then he made one, he's obviously been making it through the game, and he made one super fast in this episode. And all of a sudden, Cody is commenting about not wanting to face him in Final Four fire making. And Jesse is calling him a fire magician. And I just think it's one of those situations where once you start looking for reasons to vote someone out, you pile on whatever you can. And
oh, sure. And the fire making, I think, is such an interesting component. I don't like it.
Yeah.
But if you do end up being good at making fire, having the ability to make a fire, that's certainly going to come back and bite you towards this part of the game, right? Because people will remind other people about, well, they can make fire really well. And if you can't make fire really well, then that's going to work towards your benefit to stick around because you're not going to be a threat. So it is very interesting that they mention that. And I do think it is one of those, you say it enough times, people will start focusing on it and thinking about it. And again, if it is one more reason to not keep him around, people will certainly glom on and agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Sami basically agreed, because he said in interviews that he'd been good at fire and it wasn't a point of contention until he came under the microscope for voting Carla.
Right.
So again, it circles back to the real reason he was a threat, which is that people just didn't trust him. All right. Well, the seventh rule covers idols and advantages and game mechanics. And I thought it was interesting that it came out in interviews how he took a bit of a guess and told Carla just before the split tribal council that James might take her idol, even though he didn't know for sure that she had one. And, he was right, of course. And I'm sure that shook her a bit and likely also contributed to her questioning of Cassidy that we were talking about earlier. But it was really just smart gameplay on Sami's part.
Yes. And I will say that I wish we had seen this actually go down, because it is Carla's idol has been kind of this mysterious component of the game. So that would have been an interesting thing to help us understand why she ended up doing what she did at that point in time. So definitely very smart gameplay for him.
Yeah. And then we come to the shot in the dark and Sami being absolutely correct to play it.
Yes.
People had told him he was safe. Carla seemed to believe it. But he noted in interviews that he realized people like Gabler and Cody were treating him differently than they had previously. And that's when he decided he had to do it.
Right. And I didn't realize this the last time they could play it. I had completely forgotten that rule.
I had too until Jeff announced it.
Yeah. That's when I was like, oh, wait, it's the last time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that you would play it and let's say you are, successful, or, you end up not getting voted out. And so you get to stay, whatever so you end up going back to camp. This idea that people are suddenly going to be frustrated with you because you didn't trust them. I agree with you. He needed to play. It was the last time he could. He had a feeling that it might be him, and he knew just looking at the numbers, if it was 5-2, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That's not going to get someone else voted out. So he at least did the math before he took the risk, and unfortunately, it didn't pan out.
Yeah.
But I have a question. So
Okay.
if it's unanimous at that point, so his
Yep.
shot in the dark works, they just all revote right then and there, right?
I think so.
Interesting. I would have loved to have seen that.
And then there was the question, this came up on Rob's podcast with Adam, was can people play their idols at that point? And Adam seemed to think so, which does make sense because this was, he says, if you have an idol or advantage, now is your time to play it. So he plays this. He's safe. Other people, I think, could now stand up and start throwing idols out there.
I don't agree with that.
Why?
Well, okay. You're talking about before he reads the votes.
Yes. Sorry. It would be before he reads the votes.
Okay. So that is interesting because now would be the time to do so. So it's one of those, this is something that's come up before where it's like, how long do you wait to play whatever it is you're going to play? But it has to be. I mean, what if Sami never stood up?
Then he wouldn't be playing it.
But then there would be no vote.
Right.
From Sami.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
He just says, I'm going home. Never mind. Just want to pocket it. It would be weird.
It would be really weird.
I could just see Jeff like, Sami? Is
right. I mean, that's what
tell us, Sami? Sami?
Like if Jeff knows that he did this, right? And if Sami is aware that there could be that ripple effect, that if he does it, then other people will all of a sudden start playing their idols, which would be amazing. I love this idea. So it's like, how long do you sit there and wait?
Until Jeff says, okay, it takes the top off the urn. I mean, that's basically it,
Interesting. Okay.
Now, I thought it was interesting that he did play it because previously in the season, we'd seen discussion of how people shouldn't use their idol or their shot or whatever because they should show trust in their allies, much like Jesse, was advocating as we discussed earlier. But Sami was like, no, not doing that.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to fall for that nonsense.
Yeah, and I think you made the right call because if it's the last time and you think you might be going home, wouldn't it be terrible if you didn't try?
Right. Yes, people on Twitter were talking about, it has to work at some point. Statistically speaking, at some point it will work.
It's kind of like other things that the Survivor people have put out into the universe that have yet to work successfully.
I think it will work at a time. This is my prediction. Someone's going to use it who didn't need it, and that's when it will work. And it'll be like, look, you're safe.
That's going to be so lame.
You're safe. Oh, and it turns out you didn't need it anyway.
So lame.
All right. Well, we can go to Appendix A, which is about the other players keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we talk about voting out the weak and the strong and the weak and the strong. Cassidy talked in Tribal Council about evaluating strengths and weaknesses. And I'm sure that was a shout out to this appendix.
You know what, Cassidy? I think it was. Thank you for that.
We'll go with that.
I love that.
But more seriously, one reason that I, again, had predicted Sami would be targeted instead of Owen, despite both of them being left out of the Noel vote, was that Sami was seen as the stronger of the two when it came to this aspect of the game. As we discussed, he was seen as the bigger threat. Now, of course, Owen had immunity, so we'll never know for sure what would have happened, although I still think it would have gone this way. But, when it came to the trust aspect of the game, Sami was the threat there. Owen was looking for a way to prove his trustworthiness. Sami had already proved he was not trustworthy.
Right.
And, Jesse and Cody knew they had to take out the person who could threaten their path to the end game and even win if they should end up there together. And, Sami fit the bill in both regards.
Right. And at this point in the game, if you can't trust the person who is supposed to be voting with you, which I think is different in Gabler's situation, because we've talked a lot about how Gabler is a little bit all over the place. People don't know where he's coming from. People aren't sure what he's always going to be doing, and it's always a little bit of a contentious discussion when people are approaching Gabler to, which way are you voting? What are you thinking? Because he comes across as not necessarily knowing what he wants to do for the right reasons. It's just a much different approach that Gabler is taking.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone like Sami, who can be very convincing, when you ask Sami, what are you doing? And he'll just be like, oh, no, this is what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then turn around 2 seconds later and do something completely different. So it's like Gabler, you get almost a better read on, even though he's kind of all over the place and unpredictable. Whereas Sami, he's unpredictable, but in such a great way,
Yes.
where you have to be concerned with everything Sami says to you,
Mm-hmm.
because he just doesn't have a tell like I think Gabler does.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts on Sami?
I must say, I was very surprised with Sami's gameplay. When we first assessed all of the new players, when the cast announcements came out, I think both of us were suspicious. I
Mm-hmm.
think we both picked Sami as like probably one of the first ones to get voted out because the age factor, and he came across as kind of a lot in and I know he didn't like the term flashy in his exit press, but I got that sense from him
Mm-hmm.
when we saw his initial press. And so I was very concerned. I thought he was going to just get under people's skin, be a little annoying, and just be that guy that they're just like, I can't handle him right now. He's too much. But that's complete opposite. We
Right.
saw someone who was very focused, very good at knowing how to play this game. And one of the first things he did, the episode 1, was figure out that crazy bone challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I feel like at that moment he probably realized I can step it up and I can play this game a little bit differently, and it's
Yep.
going to work for me even though I'm young, and I can also use my age to my advantage while I'm playing the game, because people will think that I'm non-threatening. I'll utilize my youth to want to build relationships with them and have them teach me and lift me up. But at the same time, I'm going to be playing one hell of a game. And so I was very, very surprised to see how well he ended up doing. He's very well rounded. But I do think that it just, as you indicated at the beginning with your incredible analogy, he dug his hole just too deep. And if he had found more of an even ground, somewhere to stop at, I think he could have really like pulled it out. I really do think he could have. I was kicking myself for, I'm like, God, maybe I should have like picked Sami because he seems to be doing so well. So overall, very impressed with Sami, but I do think he's someone that came into this game wanting to play the game, and I think he realized very quickly that he could, but he focused on it in a way that we don't see very many players successfully pull off. So props to him for pulling it off as long as he did. It would have been great to see him get all the way through, but overall, very amazed to see someone so young have such a great understanding of themselves and what they can add to this game and how they can play this game with the people who are older than they are and from a different background, and appreciate them for all of the differences and what they can provide to him. So thanks, Sami, for proving us wrong.
Yeah.
You were wrong, David.
Me? No, I wasn't wrong. I was right.
Mm,
Um, but I echo everything you said, about our read pregame. Uh, and yeah, he just exceeded all expectations, I would say.
mm-hmm.
Now, I mentioned before we got into the rules, which you then mentioned here, again, how Sami said he dug himself a hole. It was hard to see how he'd get out of it, and he didn't. He's right that he did a lot of the digging himself, but it was in pursuit of his goal of playing the game with control. For a long time, he kept things balanced on even ground, like you said. He told all sides. He was with them. He had them convinced that was true. When he had to show his cards with a vote at tribal council, he always came back with a reason and, kind of soothed the wounds of those he turned on. Each time they thought he'd be with them on the next vote. Sometimes he was, Sometimes he wasn't. He wasn't the only one playing that kind of game this season. But as he said about himself, he was more vocal, and that eventually caught people's eyes. He was looking towards the end game and he was playing to win. But we've often noted here that to win, you have to make it to the end
Mm-hmm.
game. And that often means keeping your head down just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Sami had been so successful that it seemed like he could talk himself out of anything. But he finally got caught voting the wrong way, and his own tight ally Gabler didn't tell him because Sami took him just a little bit for granted.
Mm-hmm.
He did his best to get himself out of the jam, but there are too many other strong players this season, just looking for a reason and a way to take out threats. At this stage in the game, Sami had indeed shown himself to be one of those threats, and he couldn't be allowed to stick around. And that is why Sami lost.
There we are.
All right. Well, before we get to our predictions, let me.
Which you have to go first.
Yes, I do.
Mm.
Let me remind everyone that the rules we just discussed are available in both poster and t shirt form.
That's right.
And you can get all of that at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
I love it.
All right. Predictions.
Mm.
This one's going to be even tougher than usual. The preview was a hodgepodge of people talking, making offers, promises, and it basically tells us nothing. I do think it's interesting that we saw Cody ask Carla if she wanted to get to Final Four. It almost seemed like we were supposed to believe he was dumping Jesse, but I don't believe that at all. Because Cody even said this week they've been together since the beginning. They will be at the end.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I don't think that'll work out well for Cody, but that's his plan. So either they really are trying to bring Carla along, or it's part of the plan to split Carla and Cassidy. I don't know if they'd want to bring Carla because while we have seen her as doing a lot of good strategic work up until recently, I don't think Jesse and Cody see her the same way. But then Jesse also made a comment about not finding Cassidy too threatening this week. And I feel like she's been pretty under the radar with her strategy as well.
Yes.
So, Cody was talking about her being more of a threat in challenges.
Although Carla's won 2 immunity challenges.
Yes. So the question is who Jesse and Cody think is the most threatening at this point, because I feel like those two are still running the game as they've been saying.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, everyone else realizes this and revolts, which I don't think will happen. I think Jesse made a point of bringing Owen into his confidence just this episode. So I don't think he'll turn around and get rid of him. Right.
No, they need him.
Yeah. And he needs them.
Yes. And we need them.
Yes. Yes. Gabler seems to be locked up unless he goes rogue again. So I feel like it does come down to Carla or Cassidy. Considering how many times Cassidy's name has come up and she's escaped. And also thinking about how we've discussed before that once your name comes up, it tends to keep coming up.
Yes.
I'm sadly predicting next week will be the end of the road for Cassidy. And I know Sami talked about Cassidy and her hit list in his interviews. I just think it's going to finally catch up to her. I mean, I'm hoping that David isn't right this time, but I don't know who I'd be hoping for. So
right. I don't disagree that this is a tough call to be like who at this point is going home. But I landed on Cassidy as well, just kind of looking at all the permutations and also the fact that Carla has an idol, right? That more people seem to know about. So if anything, even if they want to try to flush her idol, who's going to be the other person? Who's the backup plan to Carla? It's going to be Cassidy. And unless Carla and Cassidy can somehow try to come together, and I don't see that happening either because Carla is now suspicious of Cassidy as well. I don't know where else you fall because Carla does have that idol. And I think that that's something that she probably doesn't want to play yet because she's got one more chance to do that, right? Is it 5?
Yes.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting because once we get to 5, if she's still there, there's 3 idols that can be played. Oh, that's so scary. Oh no.
It could be a Cerise situation.
Oh Lord.
It
Come
could
on,
be
Owen.
literally, there
Keep
could
it going,
literally
dude.
be 4 people with immunity in the final 5.
Yeah. This is awful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm unfortunately going to go with Cassidy as well. She's been so much fun to watch. She's been incredibly impressive in the challenges. But yeah, I don't know how she and Carla stay together and how she ends up making it one more vote. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but that's
Unless she wins
I'm
immunity.
and that, you know
then
what?
everything goes up in the air.
Sure, then we're completely wrong.
Yeah. It's happened before, once or twice.
But who's counting?
Right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. You can get access to Survivor Academy, Patron 5 for 5, and much more. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are the Facebook groups and Discord to keep you occupied with a great group of people, including both of us.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about Survivor, Big Brother, whatever other show is on, life in general. So support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or just click on the link at our robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed page. And once you get to the Facebook groups, make sure to say hi.
Yes, and you should also say hello to us on Twitter, which is still around. It's still there. So I am at Jessica Lewis 89 and he is at David Bloomberg. You should certainly follow us both. We do live tweet during the episodes, also tweet during the week. And I will say that David Bloomberg posts his TikToks on his Twitter page. So if you're not on TikTok, you can at least watch them there. He is at David_Bloomberg for his TikToks, which incredible content. You should definitely check him out. He's like a content creator, right? Is that what they call you at this point?
Yes, that is what I am. Yes.
You definitely need to follow him on not only his Twitter account, but his Instagram account, which that one, what is that one now? You changed it to
Instagram
one
is David Bloomberg TV.
There you go. David Bloomberg TV. And then I'm pretty sure you've got some other big tree that you've got going on.
Yes, I do. So to make things easier, I created a link tree. I don't know how well it can be seen and on the imp page, but you go to linktr.ee, so linktree with a dot before the EE /David Bloomberg. And you get my Twitter, my TikTok, my Instagram, links to these podcasts, my Mastodon account, my new post account, which for some reason isn't showing up here. Maybe if I hit refresh. There it is.
There it is.
And then, of course, easy links to the poster and the T-shirt. Although we already told you where to get those. So yeah, again, linktr.ee /David Bloomberg. And after that, make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP Survivor podcasts by going back to the YX Lost feed page. You'll find all the great content like the Know-It-Alls, the Stock Watch, Survivor International, the B&B, and much, much more.
And I would like to thank Scott St. Pierre for the editing that he does, not only for the Why Blank Lost podcast, but for all of the podcasts at the RHAP website. Thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you do in the wee hours of the morning. And also thank you to Will from America for the theme song that you created for the YX Lost podcast. We appreciate it greatly. It's super catchy. So thank you for that. And David, I must say, as much as it pains me, you were right.
Yes.
Yeah, Sami went home.
It shouldn't pain you. You should sing.
Do you feel good about yourself?
I do. That reminds me. I forgot to do this and everything else that was going on. A couple days ago, I got a Facebook memory about when you made the song, the David You're Right song. I was going to play that, and I totally forgot. So,
David, you're right. David, you're right. That one?
Yes, that was the one. There we go. See, we had it live.
There you are, everyone. You
And
can
this is
hum
why
along
people
to
have
it.
to listen all the way to the end to get
They
that.
do, because I sang a little tune.
That's right. All right. Well, we will see everyone again in a week. And, you know, talk to you on Twitter or any of the other many places. Until then, bye.
Bye.